Well, good afternoon, everybody. Apologies for the slight delay. We were trying to experiment with various sound options. Hopefully, you'll be able to hear Mark. Mark, if you say something.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are.
Hopefully, everybody could hear that. Okay. If you just put a yes, that would be great. And then we can crack on. Hopefully, hopefully everybody. Yes. I think everybody's hearing us. Okay. So here we go then. Just dive into the first question. Thoughts on the Brendan's petition for clemency with Governor Evas. Mark, what's your take on this news?
What a broad question, but I guess that's
what you're here
first
for.
Reaction. Sorry, Paul.
I'm saying that's what you're here for. To tackle.
I'm sorry. Your voice is getting interrupted to me, so I'm not sure whether that's the same in reverse. But when you asked me that question, I could hear your voice quite clear. But then when you said something else a moment ago, it sort of was an interrupted conversation. But you could just ask me the question again, and I'll make sure the sound is okay from your side.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to ask your thoughts on the petition by Brendan for clemency, and I know it's a bit of a vague, as you said, it's a bit of a wide subject, but well, give it your best shot and tell us what you think.
Okay, so I suppose my first emotional reaction to it is the question of the best interests of Brendan as an individual person. So, so Brendan, irrespective of the broader issues of his unfair conviction and his wrongful conviction, which I think most people would agree that there's no doubt his conviction is unfair and should never have occurred, and for a host of reasons why that is the case. My main concern is Brendan's personal welfare, and his welfare is best served by him being out of prison and home with his family and trying to get on with a normal life if that's possible. So any attempt by Brendan's lawyers to get him released has my wholehearted support. And I don't think, in my view at least, it takes anything away from all the arguments we've been putting forward in regard to the conduct of his matter. But I'm just pleased that there's a direct question being put at Governor Evas to consider clemency or whatever other form of that type of activity is. I read online that there's kind of a variation that they're seeking in regard to that, but the bottom line simply is they're trying to get Brendan out on the basis that he deserves to be out. And if a governor has powers to grant his release, they're there for a reason, right? Those powers are there for a reason. And I can't think of a better example than Brendan why those powers should be exercised. And it will be quite a statement in terms of how Mr. Evas reacts to this request.
Indeed, I think it's going to be quite an interesting question from a political point of view, because from what we gather, there's a small percentage of the population of Wisconsin that actually realize the fact that Brendan is innocent. There's another slightly bigger size of the population that cling on to the belief that Brendan could be guilty, and it seems as if there's a huge majority of people in Wisconsin don't really know much about the case, couldn't really, are not really that interested. So it's going to be interesting, isn't it? Because basically, if I've got this right, what Steve Drizzen and Laura Nywider are saying to Governor Evas is, look, everybody can see that Brendan is innocent, but your basically, your attorney general, previous attorney general, sort of argued for Brendan being kept behind bars over this AEDPA rubbish. And basically, they're saying, well, let's go above them. Let's go above the, in effect, the judiciary. Let's go straight to the governor and say to him, look, what do you think? Would that be?
Yes, I mean, right? I think so. But if you go back to the elements, the argument over AEDPA is not an argument at all. That's just an administrative load of bull crap, right? So there's no argument on the merits of what actually went on. So I just turn all that away out of my head because it's just ridiculous. But so the question to Mr. Evas is, who wasn't the governor at the time that whole a federal court, Seventh Circuit federal court hearing process was going on. The argument is you have the power, you have the authority, it's granted to you to release persons in special circumstances. Thinking of all the things that have gone on here in this matter, and we've had three. We had the first three judges, in fact 4 judges if you include it at the en banc hearing, that have sided on Brendan's side, who have got no vested interest in other than to give their best professional judgment, and who have given, arguably, without saying as much, a scathing dissenting view on what happened to Brendan. We had all those unbelievably supportive and intellectually fascinating accounts from the amici or amicus briefs that were put forward as part of the Supreme Court application, albeit that it never got heard or got taken up at least. Why are all these people of great intelligence and great independence all saying that Brendan's confession was a disgrace and clearly was involuntary? And from that point of view, Mr. Governor, you have the power to right a wrong here and exercise it. Please consider exercising it, because if you don't exercise the power in this case, then what's the point of having it? And so I think Stephen Drizzen and Laura Nyrider are doing the right thing, because Brendan's personal interests, his personal welfare, is of paramount importance here. And anything that can possibly see him step outside those prison gates is a good thing. And I'm very pleased that they've done what they've done. And it's pretty highly focused on Governor Evas. In fact, interestingly, Paul, this morning, Australian time, it's the 3rd at the moment in the evening, I was speaking to some of my friends in the US on the East Coast. No one I know through MAM, just friends I have anyway. And they were ringing me and talking to me, saying, oh, this story is just all over the national news of the United States about Brendan. They gave at least 5 minutes on the news, which is a long time for a news story. So clearly it's got the attention of a lot of people. And, as I say, to me, it's about Brendan's personal welfare, and this is a good thing that's going on.
Yes, it's. I must admit, from that point of view, it's something that's been absolutely brilliant. That since Making a Murderer first came out, and people have gotten into it, as it were, and realised what's going on. The whole, everything's been ramped up, hasn't it? Ramped up and ramped up. I mean, it's not through the supporters, as it were. It's through the work that Zellner's doing with her experts. It's as you say, it's the amicus briefs. The spotlight on Wisconsin now. They must surely be feeling it. And as I say, I mean, for me, I must admit that the whole conviction of Stephen Brendan was a very political thing. And I think Kathleen Zellner's quite right when she says, when you look at it, it's a political thing. When you look at how the state of Wisconsin have fought in the, as you say, in the Seventh Circuit, it's a political thing. It's a complete travesty. But so now we've got to the stage where, you know, we're basically calling the governor out, aren't we, and saying to him, look, forget what's gone on before. What do you think? You know, and I think the emphasis was on the fact that he coming from an education background. Am I right in that?
That's correct. That's his background.
Yeah.
And Laura Nyrider put a very cogent and compelling argument about understanding, you know, Brendan as an individual. Forget the crime around which he's allegedly involved in, if you can, for a moment, just for a moment, and see him as an individual. And, you know, I've spoken to Brendan, I think 2 or 3 times in my brief involvement with the whole matter. And the young man that we see and we know from the documentary and from other things that have passed since then is Brendan.
Yeah.
And that letter he wrote to the governor,
yeah,
was just, I mean, seriously, this is a young man who's been wrongfully convicted. He's been in prison for 13 or 14 years now, since, I guess, early 2006, so that's 13 and a half years. And he doesn't exhibit any signs of anger or, you know, any animosity. He just wants to be out.
Yeah.
And he's a loving, simple young man, and who deserves the benefit of the clemency powers of a governor, and who we sometimes seem to forget these issues amidst everything that's going on, whose confessions are, he recanted his own confession in court, and under the pressure of the court, the pressure of the prosecution, the obligation of telling the truth, they couldn't break his story or trick him in any way. But somehow the jury believed a confession gained without any lawyer present, without any parent present, was somehow more powerful than his own words in a court of law, and where there is absolutely not one iota of corroborating evidence that gives any weight to that confession. And when you take those facts, add it to the commentary that's being made by the federal court judges, many of them, and the amicus briefs and people like Seth Waxman and so on, you add that all together and think, not only shouldn't Brendan be in prison, but if there is a better case for a more appropriate case for clemency than his, I've never seen it. And you want a governor, the leader of your state, to be a leader, and here's an opportunity for Mr. Evas to be a leader.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I wasn't going to mention this. I was slightly disappointed in his Pokemon character, but as I say, that's by the by. So, yeah, it's. I mean, you're saying about this gentle giant of a guy. Is even his Pokemon character Muse is a mix, right, between Pink Panther and a meerkat. And that was the first thing he put on his letter to Governor Evas, to tell him about himself. My Pokemon, you know, Brendan, you know, he's not a danger to society. He is not the rapist, murdering what's-it that the state have made him out to be. You know, it's just, well,
you only have to read Brendan's letter and other things that we've seen from him,
yeah,
to realise what a simple, loving soul that he is. I mean, simple not in the mental sense. I mean, simple in the sense of his inner person is just a basic person who cares about family and cares about people around him, who's respectful to you know, authority and so on. He's just a good young man, now not a boy, a young man. This person is no more capable of committing those crimes than you know, flying a rocket to the moon. And our Mark Wiegert and Tom Fassbender in particular, who interviewed Brendan all those times and was happy to, coerce him and create involuntary statements without a lawyer or without a parent present, but especially a lawyer, and then, co-opt people like Len Kaczynski and Michael O'Kelly indirectly to be part of allegedly on Brendan's side, but clearly not. And then have even the State Attorney General, current one, not at the time, Deputy Attorney General, Assistant Attorney General Tom Fallon made straight out statements of lie in the court, where in his closing arguments make statements like innocent people don't confess to the jurors. That's just a straight out lie. A straight out lie. We know that's not true. And we know it's not true generally, and we know it's particularly not true for young people and people with limitations, whereas about 80% of all the persons exonerated who were of below age or limited ability, 80% of them gave false confessions, and the average is 25 for all adults. But Tom Fallon can happily and willingly make these statements of not just inaccuracies, they're straight out lies to the jury and convict to assist in convicting this innocent young man.
Yep.
And Judge Fox, in Brendan's case, I don't know the rights and wrongs of closing arguments, but for him to be happy for those statements to be made or through his silence is just another part of the ills of the Wisconsin criminal justice system.
Yep. And
here's a chance to not only Mr. Evas to get this matter right for Brendan, but to launch a new era of being right for everyone in that state and rooting out for good, over time at least, this sort of behaviour.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take you back a step there, what you said.
Have I still got you?
Yep, absolutely. A couple of, I've got two prized possessions, an email from Robert Herman and an email from Mark Wiegert, both saying that they stick by the investigation. They're 100% sure of the guilt of both men, and it's it's just laughable. What we now find though is that the other bit of latest news is that the Sweaty Prize himself, he was trying to punt a copy of his book onto me, but I wasn't having anything of it, so he blocked me. But the creepy creep that he is, he's now revised his best-selling novel, which is a pile of well, anyway, I won't go down there. It's nonsense, but apparently he's added 2 more chapters, and I thought, well, okay, if he's added 2 more chapters, that's fair enough. Let's hear what his explanation is for the bullet having wood in it. For the DNA on the hood latch being 90 times more than it should be. The fact that there's 20 times more DNA on the on the key. The fact that this stupid CD was held in Tom Fassbender's possession. I now discover he doesn't mention that at all.
Is that right?
His 2 extra chapters are to do with wanting to see Brendan released. I mean, what sort of crazy world are we living in? You've got Mark Wiegert and Herman banging on about the fact that Brendan and Steve are completely guilty, and you've got Ken Kratz saying, "Oh well, we should let Brendan out." If they really thought that Brendan was this rapist murderer that they think they are, that they're trying to say they are, you should be keeping him in for life. I wouldn't want him walking the streets if he really is.
No, of course.
So what's going on here?
No, it's the story changes with the wind.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought you made a very, very important and interesting point over the last week or 2 about putting to Mr. Kratz the issue of, well, if it was, and it was your argument that in their note to Jerry Buting and Dean Strang back in late December 2006, early January 2007, that the findings of the contents of Brendan's computer, right, was not relevant to the matter, and therefore there was what they call a stipulation or a stip or something, that we don't need to bring in the guy who did the investigation. But and therefore, as we do know now that we didn't know then, that computer content was horrific in its pornography and its dealing with the death of young women and mutilation of bodies and that. And if that was allegedly Brendan's computer, which they maintain it was, why didn't they use it against him at trial? You know, that was never ever brought up.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's a really, really interesting point. You can't have it both ways, right?
No.
If the content of that computer was so damning as we know it was, and as they say it was Brendan's computer, which we happen to know it wasn't, but anyway, they say it was, why didn't they bring it up against Brendan at trial?
Well, it would have been perfect for them, because it would have been a piece of evidence, physical evidence against Brendan. You know, I mean, you know, you've got Mark Hoddinott, you know, with this stupid, crass comment. You know, we didn't find anything because they had 5 days to clear up.
I mean, seriously?
But I mean,
he's really.
He's supposed to be a lead detective.
Yeah. I don't know what they're doing, trying to lead down the garden path. They're certainly not lead in terms of competency. Well, maybe they are quite competent. They're competent of doing the wrong thing. This is not about being incompetent. This is about being corrupt, right? That's the important difference. It's about being corrupt.
Yep.
And they would have known fully well not only what they were doing with Brendan in interviews was wrong, not only was that process wrong, but what they were getting back from Brendan should have alerted them immediately to, hang on, there's no way this guy could have been involved in this, and he's an unreliable witness, right? But we know that all sounds like some logical process to get that point, but we know he simply got targeted because he was part of the Stevens alibi, and he was a weak link that they could target and try to turn him as evidence against Stephen. And that's the child abuse element of their behaviour. And, you know, I guess I'm just repeating stuff everyone already knows, but and Laura and Stephen have done a wonderful job to get where they have, notwithstanding the fact that I wouldn't say they were unsuccessful. They were successful in many, many ways. But they have Brendan's personal interest at heart, and that's got to be paramount above everything else. And we'll see what else happens in time. Because in my view, at least, you know, Stephen's matter is going along well, and you know, the sorts of information that will come out of his appeal and subsequent investigations will shed a light, obviously, on Brendan, because irrespective of whether Brendan's released or not, it will shed a light on Brendan because the state's narrative is that they acted together. Mm-hmm. So if it's shown to be the case that that's not the case, well, then Brendan's case would fall over anyway, in my opinion. So anyway, we'll see. Let's see what time brings. But for the moment, the key issue here, as far as I'm concerned, is that Laura Nyrider and Stephen Drizzen and those supporting that team are doing a great job in looking after Brendan's best interests. And you know what? Brendan himself is doing a great job of being an inspirational human being against all this adversity. And, you know, he's an amazing young man.
Absolutely. I must just point out that I, for one, and I'm sure everybody else here, doesn't mind at all you repeating things that have already been said over and over again, because we love the Aussie accent. So no, you keep repeating the stuff, pal. We don't mind that at all. Now, I was going to ask you about this because we did a chat about the Shawn Wreck, Chris Hansen interview. It's come to my attention that I might have been a bit too presumptive about Shawn Wreck being on the sort of guilty side. apparently that's possibly not the case. In which case, I would say that is excellent news. I'm sure you would agree with that.
I don't see this in terms of sides. I don't see either here or anyone in terms of. I see this in terms of truth and fiction, right? So we just simply need to see the truth. And if Shawn Wreck has got issues of provable truth that undermine Stephen's claim to be innocent, show them, right? Mm-hmm. We want to see the truth. We're not supporting Stephen per se just because it's Stephen Avery. We're supporting him because we believe he hasn't been the recipient of the truth.
Yeah. And
so to me, it's never about sides. It's just about making sure the truth gets told.
Yeah.
Obviously I hold the view, and as do you, that we believe Stephen to be innocent based on the facts that we know. But others can hold a different view. If Shawn, Mr. Wreck, I should say, has got a documentary that is balanced and shows factual matters, not selective matters, which he has accused others of doing in the Making a Murderer crew, well, then I want to hear them too. So,
yeah, I mean,
let's hope that's the case.
Yeah, for me, if Making a Murderer is not slap bang in the middle in terms of being neutral, if it is slightly in the favour of the defence, it is purely because it was the defence that contributed to the documentary. I hear that although Kathleen Zellner, I believe, was invited to come in to take part in this Convicting a Murderer.
I just lost you, Paul. Oh, there we go. I got you. Yeah.
I understand that although Kathleen Zellner had been invited to contribute to Convicting a Murderer, she probably felt that she was, supposed to keep with the Making a Murderer film crew, rather than sort of change sides, as it were. So I don't know.
Yes, I think probably. I think from an ethical point of view, she probably really can't.
Yeah.
Commit. Short of what she says generally publicly. So I don't know. I don't know what their obligations are when she's in an active court matter. So I don't think it's appropriate that she should be involved in a documentary beyond, the restatement of public statements she's already made. Yeah. So. Which they can just cut and paste from stuff that she's already done.
Yep. So. Now, yesterday we had a podcast from a guy that I can't remember his name, and it was him, Laura Nyrider, and Brendan all talking together. Did you catch some of that?
I did, actually. Could I just say, just for a second, that I'm hearing your voice in an intermittent way. So if I'm a little bit slow in responding, it's just because I'm not sure totally what you're saying. But yes, to your question, I did hear that podcast or parts of it that was shown. I thought it was fascinating to hear Brendan speak in the way he did, and also Laura Nyrider's an analysis of things was always very interesting. So.
Good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I like it. It helps people see who Brendan is, right?
Yep.
Who is. I remember Brendan's mother has always said, and we've heard her say, if only the Hallmarks or if only the state would come and talk to Brendan and see who he is, they would see that he's an innocent man.
Yep.
And we're now, in a more public forum now, learning a little bit more about Brendan as a young man.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharon. Yes, Jason Flom was the interviewer of Laura and Brendan. But what I was going to say was that, can you remember? It was yesterday. There was an even better podcast released. Did you manage to catch that one?
Oh, was that?
Yes.
Is that the second one of Fenn's podcast?
Absolutely, yeah. Fenn and Julie's.
Yeah. And I haven't actually listened to it yet. I've listened to her first one.
I listened to that first.
I heard there was an extra special guest on there.
Very special guest on. And I did listen to it all, and it was very, very interesting because the dude. I criticise the dude friendly way. You know what we're like. We have a bit of banter, but he talked about so many different cases on which he knows so much information. It is very impressive listening to listening to the dude going on about the various cases and just wrongful conviction in general. What I did find interesting was he explained that before making a murderer, he mainly watched and listened to and got as much of the sort of true crime genre of stuff that he possibly could. And I couldn't help thinking, I don't know about you, Mark, but before Making a Murderer came out, I never used to watch that stuff. I used to watch sport and cars. That was my interest. Sport and cars, cars and sport.
I'm sorry, Paul, if I sound a bit odd here, but I'm having trouble understanding some of the things you're saying because your voice is cutting in and out on me.
Right. Okay. I'll try that once more. I'll cut to the chase. The dude in his podcast was saying that before Making a Murderer came out, he's always been interested in true crime.
Yes.
Yeah. Whereas for me, before my daughter told me asked me had I heard of Manitowoc, I was quite happily just in my little world of, well, let's say music, sport, cars. I didn't have any interest in this sort of stuff whatsoever. I don't know. Are you the same, or did you have a previous interest in?
No, I did have a very healthy interest in true crime, and have done for a long time. I did, even though it was part of my economic studies. I did 3 years of law as part of my bachelor studies, and I've always been fascinated with the law, but I've also been fascinated with true crime as much for the statement it says about human behavior, let alone, if you like, the specific facts of what happened to someone and the pain and suffering that resulted from that. So it didn't take me much to jump on with interest on Making a Murderer. It was almost, I didn't really get a sense of connection to it or know much about it until my daughter also told me about it back about 2.5 years ago. And but as I said, I was already a disciple to true crime matters, and this in particular hit me because being a father myself and having a child the same age as Brendan, I could just immediately think of him as my own son and how I would feel if that happened to my child.
So yeah, absolutely. Well, as I say, that was my sort of background. I didn't know much about. I mean, as I say, when I was asked, have you ever heard of a place called Manitowoc? It's like, no, I'd heard of Green Bay because of the Packers, but didn't know anything about. I suppose I'd occasionally watch the odd program about stuff that made the news, but it's just that it makes me laugh when occasionally we get referred to as being members of a cult that was some sort of disciples of this sort of bizarre, we believe in this bizarre conspiracy that all these people conspired together and they're conspiring to take down the, take down the government.
I mean, seriously, you know me better than most people.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm as boring as normal as they come, right? I'm a financial guy.
Yeah.
I don't wear cardigans, but every day I deal with numbers and get in my car and go to work and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I've got no vested interest in being part of a cult. In fact, quite the opposite. I mean, we're committed to this because we're after the pursuit of the truth.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Absolutely.
And there's such a wide variety in terms of the groups of people who are doing this that tells you how powerful this is. And when I also hear others on the other side describe people like us as quote unquote fans, FANS, fans of Stephen, Avery and Brendan Dassey or the whole thing, I think, seriously? Fans? We're not fans. We're supporters.
Yeah.
This is not, going to a rock concert. This is dealing with someone's lives.
Yeah.
And you and Eric Jose and thousands of others are putting significant effort into time and money and commitment to trying to assist not only Stephen and Brendan, but bring some light, or shine some light, as Stacey Seabrook says, the filament, right?
Yeah. Shine
some light on the wrongdoings here in Wisconsin, which sadly, as we now know after so many years looking at this, is really just the tip of the iceberg in a lot of problems with the US criminal justice system. So fans, a cult? I don't think so. We're just genuine people interested in the inhumanity of what's going on.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we've been going now for 35 minutes or so. We're not going to keep these people much longer. I'll let you crack on. I've got stuff I need to get on with. It's been brilliant that we've had loads of people here, and a few of the people that wield these spanners. Have you seen them? They're the ones that have got the big spanner by their names, you know.
Yeah, what are they? Motor mechanics or something? Are they?
I think so. Yeah. They're here to fix the gas-powered computer in case it starts to go faulty, you know. But no.
Hey, one thing I would like to say before we close is to encourage everyone to go and sign that petition.
Oh yes.
And I'm sure people realise this, but there is a kind of a one-sentence default statement to make, but you can add to that, right? So, I think the statement might say, we asked Mr. Governor Evas to, whatever it does say. It's just a quick statement, but just write your own words after that as well. And I think that would be a good thing for everyone to do. But this is a really wonderful opportunity. It sounds a simple thing, but it's a really wonderful opportunity to point back at the governor, not to attack him, but to show him his role and the role that he has and the authority that he has to make a wrong right. And this is a wonderful opportunity to do that. And I would just encourage everyone, no matter where you are in the world, to go online there and sign that petition.
Yeah, both you can sign the petition. You can also email certainly the office of Tony Evas direct. It's something like info@Evas, whatever it is. I'm sure everybody is more than capable of finding the email address for the Tony Evas administration. I must admit, I sent him an email. You just get the standard reply, but my email was and I've still got them here, these flyers that I made out. And I think just touching on what you mentioned just then, the fact is that I think most of us, I think virtually all of us have got at some point in our sort of profile sort of description about us that we are seekers of the truth and justice for Teresa Halbach, Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. And we always put it in that order. Why? Because it's important. Because, if Kathleen Zellner gets her hands on the evidence and it proves that Stephen and Brendan are guilty, we're going to be the first ones that are going to say, you keep them locked up for life. You don't ever let them out if they really did this.
Of course.
But no, if it's, as I say, I've got this sort of, it's a thing that I made up. It was a flyer that I made up for the rally. I'll not bore you with it, but it basically says, looking at all the evidence that has been that Kathleen Zellner has developed so far, why are they not giving her any more evidence? What have they got to hide? What have the state got to hide? To me, it just seems more and more and more a case of there's something political in this.
Oh, there definitely is.
You know,
there's no question about it, because if what we say is true, and let's just leave it at that level, that is that there was a conspiracy to frame Stephen Avery at the expense of both Stephen and Brendan, and the bringing of justice to Teresa for her, demise, and that's extremely sad. If that is true, the implications for, the reputation of not only those that were directly involved, but indirectly the whole of the system are massive. So, but Tony Evas is new to the role, right? He's got an opportunity to break that horrible chain of corruption by just saying, let Brendan be free under his authority, and at the same time allow the whole case to be fully and independently examined. Let all the evidence be independently examined, obviously Kathleen Zellner is moving towards, hopefully through the Court of Appeals, to an evidentiary hearing for Stephen, and allow Stephen to have a new trial, if that's where it gets to, with all the evidence brought to the table, and without the stupidity of what has gone on in the trials 13 or 14 years previous. And then and only then can you begin a process, one of healing, and secondly, by introducing appropriate law reform to minimize the likelihood of this sort of behavior can happen again, and just without laboring the point. This issue of prosecutorial immunity has got to cease. The issue of especially underage people being allowed to be interviewed without a responsible person present. I don't mean just a parent, by the way, someone who legally has the obligation to protect Brendan's interests. Those two reforms alone would do a huge advantage to improving the system of justice in Wisconsin, let alone anywhere else.
Yeah, I would take issue with one point, though, that in general, yes, to have an attorney present, a lawyer present, I just can't help thinking how much quicker Brendan would have been coerced had Len Kaczynski been in the room with him.
No, but my point about that's
I know what you're saying.
My point is that it's the attorney's obligation
yes.
to say to Brendan, doesn't matter what he shouldn't have an opinion about Brendan's guilt or innocence in front of police officers. He should be saying, Brendan, you don't need to answer that question. You don't need to answer that question. You don't need to answer that question.
Yeah.
Because if Brendan if he had that responsible person present, and such a person would tell him not to answer those questions, there would be no confession. Brendan would not be in prison. There was no corroborating evidence whatsoever in regard to Brendan's matter. And that extremely prejudicial statement made by Ken Kratz on March the 2nd or whatever, 1st or whatever it was, that clearly had an impact on Stephen Avery's trial 11 months later. And because people, the potential pool of jurors were polluted by those salacious statements that Ken Kratz made. None of that would have happened. None of that would have happened had it not been for the fact that Brendan was abused with no one present to protect him. You introduce that presence. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, as much as this seems a bit fanciful, if Laura Nyrider was Brendan's attorney sitting in their room when he was asked to be interviewed. Brendan would never be in court. He would never have been charged. All that we now know would have never happened. So this is what I mean. Even these very simple steps, these law reform steps, including prosecutorial immunity, which takes away the bravado these people have that they can never be charged, or they feel like they never can be charged, would take that away. Because if they know they can be charged, they'll behave appropriately in most cases anyway. So we want to see that change, and as I say, let Brendan be free, but start the process of that change And fascinating enough also is the fact, because of Stephen's first wrongful conviction, they introduced the videotaping of interviews, of which Brendan was one. Imagine if we didn't have those interviews, if we didn't have those videotapes of Brendan being interviewed, and we just had to rely on what police officer said he said. Statements from, Brendan, like they said, they got to my head, we would never know about. So we can thank Stephen Avery, at least Stephen Avery's case of first wrongful conviction, for some level of reform, but there's still a lot more to go.
Well, actually, you've just touched on a subject that I was going to discuss with you at the beginning of the week, until we started getting some other interesting things to talk about, such as Shawn Wreck and the petition yesterday. And that is just a final opinion. What do you think would have happened had the depositions continued? What would have happened if Tom Kasurik was made to face the music on the 10th of November, and Dennis Vogel was made to come into those offices on the 15th of November, and have Walt Kelly and Steve Davis actually going at them,
Well, I mean, those depositions were extremely, the ones that we've seen to date before them were extremely damning, and it would have, in my opinion, continued that way. Those depositions would have then formed part of a civil trial. Interestingly enough, Paul, just to link something you've just said there to something else, when we were talking the other day about the Shawn Wreck matter, and he was referring to the depositions, or at least the civil trial, he gave no credit at all to the fact that what was going on at the time, if you like, in those depositions were, if you like, as a result of the fact that the insurance, they say, the insurance company would have been up to $36 million or some payment anyway. He totally ignored, I presume because he didn't realise, that the insurance companies had stepped away from these people and said, no, you're on the hook for this because we can see your behaviour was willful. It wasn't just a matter of being negligent or, incompetent. But the Shawn, I don't want to be Shawn Wreck bashing, but the Shawn Wreck, narrative to the interviewer was that didn't give any mention to, one, that the Vogel and Kasurik were on the hook personally, and the implication for them, and the implication for their motives given that, and the implications for them in terms of why the insurance company stepped away. The insurance company stepped away because they had a reason to step away. It was very clear that the behaviour of Kasurik and Vogel and others undoubtedly was of such a nature that it wasn't, in terms of the professional and ethical behaviour. But to go back to the heart of your question, those depositions are a matter of putting on the record their statement of fact. That would have formed part of a civil trial. I'm sure they would have been extremely successful, and there would have been some settlement from the state offered to Stephen Avery. Whether it was 36 million, I doubt whether it would be that, but it'd be something, a tidy sum. And it always bothered me somewhat, even though I know partly the reason why. It bothered me that matter seemed to just die on the basis of Stephen being rearrested at that point. He's innocent at that point, mind you. But still, at the time of his arrest, he's still 15 months away from trial. He's an innocent man in jail. So why would you stop his civil suit? Well, the argument is, because, it's easy to be wise after the event as we sit on the outside looking back 10 years on. He needed money to defend himself, so he took a settlement to have money to pay for his defence. So,
I've got one other question for you, which again has always made me wonder, and that is, what would have been the worst for Manitowoc Sheriff's Department, the attorneys, Wisconsin in general, or would it be a case of it would have meant different things to different people? The fact that they were facing a huge compensation payout, or the fact that it was literally the day after the Avery bill was passed, and it's now been renamed the Criminal Justice Reform Bill. How embarrassing would that have been to Manitowoc in Wisconsin, that you had the Avery bill?
Yeah, the Avery Reform Bill, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I know. Oh God, seriously, you can't make this stuff up. It's when you try to tell this whole story. I'm sure you've done this before to those who know very little about it. It's really a tough story to tell.
Yep.
To try to condense it into 10 or 15 minutes before you think, oh, they're going to get bored with you. And there's just so many tentacles that run off this story, both in history and in the present, and the layers of different improper conduct and the layers of people affected, victims and associates of victims and perpetrators and so on. It's just the story of the century, really, and when it comes to criminal justice matters.
Yep.
But sadly, as I've said many a time, because we've been so attached to this matter for a long time, and through the hard work of a lot of the lawyers, you keep hearing more and more of these cases, right? The Stephen Avery type events and improper police conduct, not by all, of course, but by enough to make it bad, is just the tip of the iceberg. This is going on all the time.
Yep.
And it's both frightening and extremely disappointing, and it's such an undermining of democracy when the community cannot have faith, absolute faith, in its criminal justice system, because it's the rule of law that gives democracy its structure. That is, that we abide by the law.
Yeah.
It's a democratic thing to do, and we want to, and we should be able to rely on our law enforcement officers to do the right thing. But what we've seen in Manitowoc and Calumet is this systematic and endemic approach to law, the management of law in a club format.
Yep. And
they believe that it's okay to do this. It's just that's how we do things in these parts,
Yeah.
Well, the people of Manitowoc and the people of Wisconsin and the people of the United States deserve much, much better than that. And the Tony Evas issue with Brendan and his clemency petition and could be an opportunity to short circuit this issue and get us back onto a system of respect and regard for our rule of law.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think in general, for not just Wisconsin, America, throughout the world, it's always got, there's a great saying, isn't there, that it shouldn't be the honest cop that's in fear of the dishonest one. It should be the dishonest cop that's in fear of the honest one, and that's clearly doesn't always apply.
And in my country and in yours, we're far from perfect either.
Yep.
I can assure you of that when it comes to these things. But just look at the numbers. Let the numbers speak. There are 2.3 million people in prison in the US, the highest incarcerated nation, not just in numbers, but in percentage of population in the world.
Yep.
4 or 5 times greater than in my country and yours, which are countries to some degree that we would compare each other with in terms of the United States.
Yep.
Why is it that the United States imprisons so many people? I don't need an answer to that question, but I want people to think about that and how has that come about. And I have mentioned this in the past. Forgive me if I'm being a bit repetitious. That there's a great Netflix movie called 13th, which is based on the 13th Amendment of the United States, which is the slavery amendment. That I would encourage people to watch. It's about only an hour and a half.
Yep.
That gives an extremely clear expose on from the 1970s to the present as to what has gone wrong to cause this problem in the US.
Yep. It's actually by the same Eva DuVernay, the same film producer that did When They See Us.
Okay.
It's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same.
So,
same lady. Okay, well,
yeah.
Mark, I've kept you far too long. We were going to finish this about 20 minutes ago, but then we just kept going. So apologies for that. Hopefully,
not at all. I hope I haven't sent anyone to sleep. So.
Well, no, I haven't gone to sleep either. So a quick shout out also for the fact that tonight, if anybody's in the Galashiels area, to come along to the Accordion and Fiddle Club when Derek, who is on the chat here, is going to be the guest artist. But I don't suppose you're going to be in Galashiels area tonight, are you, Mark?
No.
That's a shame.
I'd like to have a quick shout out to the kookaburras outside my house that they don't start laughing too early in the morning and wake me up.
Yeah.
But but I hope to be in the Galashiels area sometime in the near future.
Yeah.
That'd be fun. I enjoyed it last time I was there.
Yep.
And so I appreciate that environment very much.
Good. Well, I'll let you crack on, and thank you to everybody for joining in. And well, I would just like to say a big thank you finally to all of the admins that have been so busy posting all of the links to everything. It's always a great source to come back to. You can just click on it, and it's brilliant the way that information is shared. So, well, thank you, Mark.
My pleasure, and goodbye to everyone. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to talking more in the future.
It's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from him. Bye for now.